Let's get some more reaction now. South Africans are in for a weekend of political uncertainty with no word yet on whether or not the president will resign. Now, Cyril Ramaphosa was due to address the nation last night, or so we were told, before that changed. Then today, the ANC and EC gathered to discuss the matter, only to emerge shortly after with less clarity than before. Will these early days of December be Ramaphosa's last in the presidency? Will we ever know? Let's get the view now of political analyst Ebrahim Fakir. Ebrahim, before we talk about the political fallout and how the last 48 hours have unfolded, has it been 48 hours? It feels like it's time is but a blur in days like this. I mean, there has been word over the last few hours or so that the president will take the Phala report on legal review. Surely, sensibly, knowing what they knew about this case, even before the panel's findings came out, they should have had a plan in action that said this was going to be our first port of call, no matter what the findings are. We'll take it on legal review and then try and get our ducks in a row. And yet, the first reactions were, there's going to be an announcement, there won't be an announcement, it's imminent, then it wasn't imminent. It just seemed that nobody was really prepared for what the next steps should be once the panel's work was made public.
Marcel, I think there was a genuine belief that the panel's findings and recommendations, not that they are findings in law, but the recommendations would not be of the nature and character that they were. So I think people were actually caught a little off guard. I certainly was, because I think many people took President Ramaphosa at his word. And, you know, I mean, even today, if you look at a lot of the vox pops and elsewhere, people are prepared to give the president the benefit of the doubt. That's not unusual. It's also not unlikely, because invisibly, there's been a substantial amount of reform. There's been a substantial amount of recalibration of our public institutions and clawing back of a lot of our public morality. That said, on the basis of the president's own submissions to the Section 39 panel, there are a number of inconsistencies, unfortunately, which come up. And some of those inconsistencies would lead one to believe that perhaps there is room for a greater amount of doubt than there has been before. There's some things which make absolutely no sense. For example, a president who says, no, I'm not involved, this is not my business. Well, why didn't he leave it to Mr. Chauke to follow up the things, number one? Number two, you can't, on the one hand, say, I'm not involved, and yet here you are liaising with the Namibian authorities and asking them to keep things discreet. So either you are involved or you're not involved. Now, those kind of inconsistencies, some of it which may well be cleared up upon further investigations. But I'm a little troubled by this idea that, you know, the review is being taken, I mean, the report is being taken on review. And the reason why is because this is a parliamentary process. Now, ordinarily, I also don't think that there ought to be these kind of things like Section 99 or Section 39 panels, because, you know, the Section 89 is actually a process which is embedded in the Constitution, and it's a political process. The reason why we have this now elaborate process, which is a sub-process of a process, just by the way, is because people wanted to prevent the kind of flimsy motions of no confidence and impeachment processes, which could well have been done because of the immaturity of our politics, right? Now, because of that flimsy type of politics, because of the immaturity of our politics, you create this whole new elaborate process with an investigation. Then this investigation and inquiry must recommend something to Parliament. Parliament's presiding officers then take this thing and consider it. They consider it to plenary. Plenary then sends it to an actual different committee and decide whether they must establish, an ad hoc committee or a special committee or an existing standing or portfolio committee can come up with this. Only then do they come up with a resolution, which they will then debate in the House, and then you need the 2/3 majority for this thing to pass. Now, what's happening now is you're saying that the independence of Parliament, they decided in their wisdom that they must have this process. The president's within his rights to take this thing on review. Absolutely no doubt about that. But it does call into question the nature of elaborate processes which have been embedded in parliamentary process, which ought not to have been there in the first place.
And you've laid it out so clearly about step after step after step and what should be followed. But you also use the word flimsy. Some might even say messy is how the last 24 hours have unfolded. I spotted your tweet last night around 7 o'clock, and your tweet said, spin, spin, spin. How can an announcement both be imminent and be subject to consultations and engagement? And one hadn't even had a chance to go through everything. And then Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma was on air right here saying that the president must step aside. So I suppose for certain factions, it works for this to be spilling out in public and to be messy, as it were. But for the ANC as a whole, it really doesn't count in their favour for all of this to be so messy, not just on a South African platform, but indeed an international platform. How do you think they come out of these next few days? I mean, this NEC meeting was supposed to take place today. Now they come out to say, okay, we actually need time to actually read the report before we meet. It is just quite messy, isn't it?
It's not. It's messy, but it's necessary. Unfortunately, it's a necessary mess because we have to follow the process. Because without due process, you will have the creeping abuse of rights and the abuse of authority and so on. So we don't necessarily want that. We don't want to go back there. But that said, you also can't establish a set of standards by which you expect political players to comply and on which you have hinged the whole wagon of renewal and rehabilitation of public institutions. And then you yourself are caught wanting on the very set of principles and values that you have established. That's the first set of problems. And this is a problem for President Ramaphosa. For the ANC, it's a repeat of everything that has happened before with President Zuma. And this is an ANC problem. The ANC shielded. They used their majority in absolutely crude ways. They tied things up in process. Then there were processes within processes. Then there was procedures within procedures. Then there were appeals within appeals in court cases. Then there were delays. Then there were obfuscation. Then there was the abuse of majority. And then sooner or later, it was 9 years. And we needed a commission of inquiry into state capture, which, by the way, would not have been necessary had Parliament played the role that it's supposed to have been. Again, I think we're finding that the ANC may decide to close ranks because they're very good at this. Once they're under siege, you may well find, Marcel, that, in this process of consultation and so on, what might be happening is a closing of ranks. You have the kind of hysteria, which is like, listen, everyone's out to get us. We told you that this is a conspiracy. Everybody hates the ANC. Who this faceless and where this faceless conspiracy comes from, of course, no one wants to say. But can you see the harking back of this to the way in which both in Nkandla, state capture, and every other issue which required decisive parliamentary intervention was actually scuppered because the majority party abuses its majority. The one difference now is that the majority party is much more further apart than they have ever been before. And as you say, the scavengers are out. They're literally looking to feast on the carcass of what's left. And that's the dangerous moment we're in. But that said, we can't have a public morality which says, because we've got other people who are really bad, we must accept the flagrant disregard for values and principles that we have established simply because we must keep the others out. That's no way to construct a public morality.
Yeah, that's really been a concerning narrative that's come out over the last couple of days about how this is more about he's better than all of the other alternatives. Let's just push everything that's come out of this report aside. Let's look at what the alternatives are and then pick our direction from there.
No, I think that's what weighed on the president yesterday, because I think he genuinely did think that, look, if this is the case, perhaps I should resign. And no one wants to confirm or deny that that was the case, but I think indications are that was it. Then people had to prevail upon him that perhaps don't be so hasty, and I think they were right in the sense that, look, This is a long process, as I laid out the procedure. That's just for Parliament. Here, there's still a question of review of the report itself. So there's a lot of stuff that's out there. Much of the report is actually quite tenuous. Some of the stuff in the report is vague. But again, on the president's own submission, there are vagaries and inconsistencies. Now, that the report goes on review is one thing. That there's a long parliamentary process which must still play out is another. The third is that there's another stream of investigations which are going on. What those investigations reveal, we have no. The president may well be exonerated, but the question will always come, and we will also return to the question, why would this haziness, why would there vagueness, and why was there contradiction in your very submission of the Section 89 panel? So that question is never going to go away, even if he's exonerated. Now, I think what has happened is that people around him have said, look, let this thing play out. There are ways in which this is defensible, and that's probably right. But, at the end of the day, if the president is found to have contradicted himself, he is found to be wanting on certain of the issues, then what? Irrespective, we are going to be left in a way in which someone has to replace him. And either we have a rehabilitated politics, or we continue with this kind of recidivist politics endlessly, and you just license impunity and you license unaccountability.
Ebrahim, before I let you go, a two-part question. From what you know about President Cyril Ramaphosa as a political animal, even what you know, especially you know about him long before he became president and entered into a formal politics, do you think he still has the stomach for this job, firstly? And then secondly, if he stays the course and follows through this process, what kind of impact do you believe this may have on the ANC elective conference? Or is that too long of a question for us to answer in a few minutes' time that we've got left?
No, it's not. Look, he survived several things. He survived Marikana, and that could have been relatively debilitating had someone who was much less astute. So there is that. He survived other kind of political assaults in the NEC and so on. So I think he can survive, and I think he will be able to go to the conference. Damaged he might be. He might lose some of the support which he may have taken for granted, but I can see that he sees his way through the conference, especially if he can appeal and if you take the other side, people who don't like him, and say, listen, you were given due process for a full 9 years. The due process has to play out now. You can't be that hasty. So yesterday, when we were all talking about resignations, of course, we were talking about resignation on his own volition. But I think if he stays the fight, and I think he can be prevailed upon to do so, he may yet prove that he can consolidate many of the reforms and rehabilitation of public institutions which have happened. Already you can see there's been some cleanup. Public services such as trains, such as public transport, which was not running for the past 5 or 6 years, now suddenly doing so. The revenue service is in a much better space than it was previously. The NPA is able to do things it was not able to do 5 years ago. If given a chance, he can rehabilitate it. The problem here is that I think he made an error of judgment. When the story broke, he should have been open and transparent. I think he still has a moment in which he can be open and transparent and clear this thing up once and for all. If he doesn't, I'm afraid, on the basis of his own values and principles, he will have to vacate office.
And on that powerful note, political analyst Ebrahim Fakir, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's always an education.